Yeah, I've got it.
Okay. Well, all right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to part two of my conversation with Jackie Walker and 1+1. This is your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting, and our conversation got cut off last time, so we're continuing with part two, our conversation with Jackie Walker about where does the left go after the defeats of Corbyn. We're going to talk. We're going to talk a bit more about black power and the Black Civil Rights Movement in Britain, and where does Jackie see herself going with the social justice movement, and of course, where does the Palestine justice movement go from here after the defeats of Jeremy? So, Jackie, before we talk specifically about this latest scandal that happened with the Labour Party, with many party insiders sabotaging the Corbyn campaign from the last general elections. But before we talk about that, and before we talk about the racism, the actual racism that was leveled against a black MP who was part of Corbyn's team, but before we get into that, we were talking about the civil war that happened on the left with Brexit and Brexit-Lexit, and there were fundamentalist leavers in the Labour Party, and there were fundamentalist remainers in the Labour Party. And there was, of course, the EU left reformists, those who think that we can make the EU into a socialist project from being within, and those who simply just wanted to stay in the European Union, not really change it at all. And those are, the Blairites, or people who are just sort of, centrist on the whole issue. And I was asking you if you thought that those Lexiteers, the George Galloways of the world, the Labour Leave organization, led by Brendan Chelton, Paul Emberby, member of the Fire Brigades Union, and even some part of the SWP and those members of of the Morning Star newspaper, one of the big left-wing socialist papers that also supported leaving the European Union. Now, do you think the fact that Brexit did continue to become a soap opera, and so many from the Remain side and the Leave side just could not find a temporary truce that, okay, let's put this issue to side for one moment, and let's get into the issues that we actually agree about, which is nationalization of the industries, having a just anti-imperial foreign policy, so who do you think is mostly to blame for the fact that Brexit became a continuing soap opera, in which dare I say the left kind of backfired in their insistence on making Brexit a big issue?
I think it's really difficult to answer that question, like who was to blame. I think what I can say is that those people who pressurized Jeremy to go for a second referendum during that election period, that was such an obvious disaster. I mean, as soon as that happened, I mean, I know, by the way, I have to confess here, I knew that Corbyn's project would be almost bound to fail.
Yeah.
Because of other reasons. And I think I discussed that with you when we met at conference, which was
last September in Brighton.
And I told you that we would lose, and that we would lose remarkably as well. So, as you know, none of this came as a surprise for me. But I think just to confirm that loss, or perhaps to make that loss even more profound, the loss of what was called the Northern Wall, I think for a lot of people, that just did it. And it was so obvious that would happen. And the irony now, of course, is that you have somebody as the new leader who was part of the people who was putting that pressure on Corbyn. So
that's Sir Keir Starmer, who was Corbyn's shadow Brexit secretary or whatever the fancy title was.
Whatever it was. I mean, what seemed to me, I mean, I voted to stay in. My partner didn't. That was fine.
Really?
Yeah, but that, I didn't feel so strongly that for me it was a sort of hanging issue, if you like. I only just voted to stay in, and he only just voted to stay out. Because actually, from a socialist point of view, neither of these options were good options.
Yeah.
And I think there should have been more realization of that, actually, that we were being asked not to make real choices in terms of how socialists should be. But the fact that once there is a referendum, you then say you want another one, I thought was an electoral disaster.
Yeah, I would be more explicit and say that it was electoral suicide, knowing that there were many on the left in those forgotten communities that always, from the labor grassroots, were always against the European Union, but were ignored by the leadership of the unions and, of course, the establishment's liberal centrists of the Labour Party.
I need to call it suicide because it was, and it's a really interesting form of suicide as well. Because if you had been like me, even as a Remainer, and I was somebody who has spent the last 3-4 years virtually on the road, I've spent certainly less time at home than I have in other people's homes talking to people and travelling literally the length and breadth of the United Kingdom, including Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales.
Oh, wow.
You will know there was a profound anger around the EU and a profound anger of not being listened to. And so if you then say to those people who have voted out, well, we actually don't quite like the decision you made. We think you need a second go at getting the right decision. It was bound to backfire in that way. And I actually think the cost of that is still going to play out. It's not finished yet. It's not going to be, guys, right, well, we're out now, so that's okay. We're going to start voting Labour again. No. That loss of the North is going to be significant for some time.
Yeah, I would also say, one last thing, before we talk about where does the left go from here, and of course Palestine, the Palestine justice movement, is the fact that that Labour went from trying to have an amicable divorce with the European Union and just making sure that that the right wingers didn't get didn't get crazy with the divorce that they wanted, which was no amicable divorce at all. And I think the fact that the Labour Party went from a kind of a soft Brexit to just, okay, we don't want any Brexit at all, and we want to just overturn the referendum. And I think the fact that they also, now there is no doubt that the Brexit campaign was very much a xenophobic campaign. If you listen to any of the speeches or the rhetoric that was coming from Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Nigel Farage, and his UKIPers. And of course, if you read any of those disgusting right-wing tabloids from, The Sun to, the Daily Mail, the Express, and outlets like that. So yeah, it was a very xenophobic campaign, and I think it's okay to call out, the Leavers on that. My problem with that is that it's also like when you paint Trump supporters as all a bunch of ignorant racists, and that's just not the full truth. There were many people in those communities who simply wanted to, sorry for dropping an F-bomb, but simply just wanted to say fuck you to the establishment.
My problem when I was talking to those people is I found it very difficult not to agree with them. I want to say fuck you to those people too.
Yeah, it was a Tory grassroots' way of giving, sort of, two fingers to the Tory establishment. It was grassroots, far left, members of the Labour Party and the broader left. It was their way of saying "f you" to the Labour Party for years, just not giving them an inch on anything. And then for the country as a whole, it was also just, their way of doing a metaphorical, general strike. And unfortunately, because Labour went into the last general election, making this round two, again another Brexit election. Well, Nigel Farage, what he did, and I spent a great deal of time before going to the Labour Party conference, researching all I could about Nigel Farage, UKIP, and the Brexit Party, and watching all sorts of Brexit rally speeches and all sorts of Brexit rally speeches. And what amazed me was that Farage, when he disavowed the UKIP because they had adopted this very far right activist Tommy Robinson, and then became the Brexit Party. In many of the speeches that Farage and people running for the Brexit Party were doing, they weren't talking anymore about immigration. They weren't talking anymore about the EU overregulating their life. What they did was they talked about, we are the silent majority. We are the majority fighting against an establishment that wants to overturn popular democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that having the second referendum totally just played into the hands of that. I mean, I have heard conspiracy theorists actually saying that, Starmer et al. Made that trap on purpose, knowing that Corbyn would then lose and then waiting to pick up the pieces. Well, who knows? Whatever. I think certainly it was a disaster for Labour to do that.
Yeah, and then Farage also spoke to the kind of feelings that I'm pretty sure you spoke, with people all throughout the UK, including, Northern Ireland and Wales you mentioned, and, in Scotland. And, Farage, in many of his speeches, he would always, he would eviscerate the Tories for what he claimed was their Brexit betrayal. But then when he started to get into, the Labour Party, he said that, look at all the MPs who represent you. Those MPs don't want you to leave. They think you're morons. They look down upon you. They say you didn't know what you voted for. They're calling you guys a bunch of dupes of Russia. And on behalf of all of us, we say, to hell with all of you guys. We knew exactly what we were voting for. And again, whether you agree with Nigel Farage or not, and he's certainly not a guy I would ever vote for, and I wouldn't even want to share a platform with him. But unfortunately, he did speak to a lot of the anger in the anger in people, and in many ways, Trump also kind of did, although he was much more of a white nationalist on steroids, though.
Yeah, exactly.
But all right. But then, where does the left go from here, though? Where does the left go with as you mentioned? It still is going to be open wounds. We still have an arch Remainer who magically became leader of the Labour Party. The left is very much demoralized. So where does the left go from here, and what are the implications for the Palestine justice movement?
I think those are two separate questions, actually, in a way, which sort of meet, but they're so. I mean, where does the left go? I mean, we don't know at the moment. I think we're at a period when that's what people are pondering. Now, some people are deciding that where they're going is out of the Labour Party, and some people are staying in to form some kind of actual opposition, because it is plain what kind of opposition is going to be headed up by Starmer. And it's an opposition that is going to be tinkering around at the edges and hoping to, pull in that middle ground. But it's also and this is the important thing, it's an opposition that is certainly not going to take a firm line, for example, on issues like racism against people of colour, or backing up the position of low-paid workers. So it's that kind of opposition that you're talking about. Now, I think people are going to make their choices. Some people are going to stay in Labour and some people aren't. But it's always been like this. It's not like that's changed anything. And I'm not sure how much this period will change the left. I think it will change the left in this. I think when Jeremy Corbyn became leader, I think we were totally naive as to the lengths that the right would go to. I mean, we really were, we knew they would hit us with everything they had, but we didn't really know that they would be willing to work for the Tories to do that. And the bottom line is, that's what they did, and that's what that report revealed. They worked as hard as they could. We came to within 2,700 votes of winning the 2017 election. Now, when you read that report, and I knew it because I was on the ground at that time, when you read that report and you see that the way that they sent money not to the winnable seats, but to the seats of right-wingers, and how few of those seats we would have needed to have won to come into government, then basically what you've got, and you've still got it, is a party within a party. So Labour Party members are far, far to the left of the parliamentary Labour Party or the structures of the party. So you still have that fission, that conflict, that schism within the Labour Party. I don't think that's going to change. I think what's going to happen is that a number of people on the left, for a number of reasons, will leave Labour. Some because they will feel they don't want to go through what will happen to them if they remain. Some because they feel there's no point, they want to start a new party. Others will remain, and they will remain on the basis that we won't be shut up, and let them chuck us out, let them expel us, or we will work quietly towards that end. I don't think that's much, so I don't really think much has changed. Not if you look at it from what was going on pre-Corbyn. I mean, this is, we've had years of the Blairites in. Now, if you ask me a much more interesting question, which is what's going to happen to the Labour Party, I think what will happen to the Labour Party is it will slowly, however slowly is, get a less and less chance of ever getting into power. You can see how the script is being written at the moment, and this script is not just being written in the UK, it's being written across the globe, aided and abetted by the virus, which is what we have in our leaders at the moment, our leaders who have got us through. You can already see those snippets, the Battle of Britain, the D-Day landing snippet for Boris Johnson. He will wipe the floor with Keir Starmer, and he'll wipe the floor with him in terms of personality, because I know, I've talked to Starmer supporters, and they say that their man is charismatic and engaging, and well, I'm sorry, but talk about.
I beg to defer on that.
Sorry, I can't stand Boris Johnson, but if I had to have dinner with either Johnson or Starmer, I know who I choose to have dinner with. For goodness sake, you'd have a bit of a laugh with one, and I know people will hate me for saying that, but that, it means something. It means something to a lot of people who are not like us. They're not political nerds. So by the time we come out of this, we will see that the government will have thrown billions at supporting people. Now, this throwing billions is going to have to go on quite some time to actually get the economy through. And whatever austerity then has to come in to pay for this, you know, using those ridiculous and nominal terms about national expenditure, you know, however that happens, I think you'll see that shunted away to the next election. At that point, Brexit will be done. I see absolutely no reason for voting for a Labour government. I mean, I can, but what I'm saying is, if you have already voted Tory now, what would tempt you? Because you can see what they're going to do. They'll give a little bit of a pay rise to the nurses and the lowest paid, because they built them up into being key workers, and they'll just hang on a bit to get that money back. That's what I would do if I was them. So what is Labour going to offer? What is the offer? It's not going to be radical change with kids.
The Labour, in the Labour Party, I mean the Ramoners, as the Ramoners and the Blairites, they would say that the reason why Labour lost is because we had a far left candidate, and they'll keep citing this was the biggest defeat we had since we had Michael Foot, who was the more uncharismatic Jeremy Corbyn of his time. But for me, I completely agree with you. I don't see. I mean, what is the point of supporting the Labour Party? And for me, I would even go further than that. For me, if Jeremy Corbyn couldn't beat Boris Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn, who, okay, people in Britain may have problems with his foreign policy, although I don't see what was wrong with his foreign policy. He was a peacenik. But the fact of the matter is, if Jeremy Corbyn, one of the cleanest politicians with an honorable track record, could not beat Boris Johnson, what on earth makes people think that Rebecca Long-Bailey, Angela Rayner, or Keir Starmer can beat Boris Johnson?
Even more than that, of course, to go on, and remember, they're not going to mind this, is that, actually, if you look at the 2017 result, that was a phenomenally good result, coming from where we had been left. It was a phenomenal, and that, in part, was because of the work of the activists on the ground. You're not going to get a repeat of that. You're not, most of the people who knock on the doors are people who today are feeling pretty disillusioned with how things are going. So you're not going to have that. So Keir
Starmer doesn't inspire the kind of passionate response people had for Jeremy.
Come on. I mean, really, inspirational about what? What is his offer going to be? That's my question. And he's up right at the beginning, and he may fool me totally. Now, for example, you have this report that, and I'm going to correct you in this, shows violent racism, not towards one black MP, but to all of the major black MPs.
The ones who supported Jeremy's leadership, or
yes.
And tell us who were those black MPs? So is that Diane Abbott and who else?
Dawn Butler and Clive Lewis.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't just one. It was all, and the language used was extraordinary. Now, if we had been talking about this anti-Semitism being spoken about Jewish MPs, those people would have been suspended absolutely immediately. The fact that they haven't been suspended, and what we're having is some kind of long-term investigation by people who we don't know. And linked with that, Labour have just announced some research that's going to be headed by Dawn Lawrence on why so many people of colour are dying of the coronavirus. But again, look who this is being headed by. Doreen Lawrence the mother of Stephen Lawrence, who won this, spectacular case, of course, about the murdering of her son.
But actually, and before you continue, explain explain to people who don't know the Stephen Lawrence case. Explain the Stephen Lawrence case briefly, and Baroness Lawrence.
So Stephen Lawrence was murdered by a group of racist thugs, and basically what happened was the police covered up for the killers. And it took the extraordinary campaigning of the mother, followed by a number of other people, support from the black community, for that to be revisited. And she then became a baroness and a sort of figure. However, Doreen Lawrence was also noted recently for saying that she didn't believe that colour had anything to do with what happened or has been happening to the survivors of Grenfell. She is, if you like, she's a one campaign person who, on the rest of things, is pretty middle of the road. Actually, exactly the right kind of person for Starmer to choose to chair that. I mean, if Trevor Phillips had been around, he would have chosen him, except, of course, Trevor Phillips, who is the other black go-to person for the so-called middle of the road or right-wingers, has just been suspended from Labour for being Islamophobic. So you see, the problem is, even when Starmer makes these moves, he is going to appoint people who will parrot a politics that will not be about actually finding and identifying the root of racism, the root of oppression. And so where are we to go on that? What I know is that many, many black people, who knows how many, no research has been done, are actually thinking of withdrawing support totally from the Labour Party and not voting for Labour at all. I don't know how far that will go, but I've never seen it like it. I have never seen it. And remember, for those viewers who don't understand the British system, the black vote is concentrated in urban areas, and the Labour vote depends on the urban areas for its power. So once it loses the black vote, and it can lose it not just by people of African descent voting Tory, but by people of African descent just not voting, which is already a problem. Mm-hmm. Labour Party will be in problems.
You mentioned Baroness Lawrence, and I was very shocked when you said that she didn't think racism had anything to do with what happened at the Grenfell fire tragedy. Has she become what Black Agenda Report would call the Black Misleadership class?
I'm not going to go that far to say that, but what I do know is, sometimes I would say people who have run particularly good campaigns because of their personal experience aren't actually suited to be doing this kind of analytical work. And I think I'd prefer to leave it there, because I'm loath to criticise any black person who has gone through what she has done and achieved what she has done as well. But like I say, it gives me no comfort to think that she's going to be in charge of any hearing like that. So that is, if you like, I think where Labour is heading. I think Labour is heading to, probably over a reasonably long time, lose increasing amounts of the vote. I think that's probably
ironically that is because of the establishment not wanting the Labour Party to be in actual opposition and to be an actual. They don't have. not even an eco-socialist party, but just a center-left party, which people are begging for the Labour Party to be. That, okay, we would like the Labour Party to be a radical party, but if you can't do that, can you at least try to be a center-left party?
Yeah, no, I mean, we have what we have. And part of the problem is we have the MPs we have, and the MPs have a stranglehold on the party, totally. And then you have its issue about, you know...
Vetted and abetted by the party establishment, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is a similar issue with the Democrats in America. I mean, I always try and get my head around the American system, which I find is absolute. I mean, ours is but I mean, the American system just seems to be mind-boggling.
Well, the American system is the great muckraker Greg Palast, who's done phenomenal reporting on voting suppression and stuff like that. But he's often described the American system as the best democracy money can buy.
Yeah. But we're getting like that. I don't know if you noticed. Keir Starmer refused to, unlike the other candidates, refused to reveal his donors. But actually, his donors have now been revealed because there's a time sequence in which they have to be revealed. And what was revealed was all of his, or I don't know if all of his, but the major funders have come from also the major supporters of Israel. And of course, that's why the major supporters of Israel and big business. And that's why he didn't want to. Obviously, it would have really queered his pitch had he said, well, actually, these are my funders here. And that kind of leads us on nicely to what, in terms of foreign policy. Because I think part of the problem is going to be, what's the difference going to be between Labour's foreign policy and the Tory foreign policy? In a way, you can think, well, if you're going to be like that, vote for the Tories, because they do it, at least they do it better. They're more, suppliant to American will, and so they're going to be friendlier with Trump. Do you see what I'm saying? Whereas the Labour Party might grumble a bit more, but they're still going to be within that camp. I can't see that there's going to be any difference. I mean, Lisa Nandy, who is now the Foreign Secretary,
Oh God! Seriously?
Both. I think.
Oh no!
Palestine, and she's also in Labour Friends of Israel, and that tells you everything about her and her acquiescence.
And she also backed the electoral suicidal mission of another referendum.
Oh yeah. And she also signed up with alacrity to the Board of Deputies. And there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that we will very soon, we will see either her or Starmer going off for an official visit to Israel. Yes, with all that we know will actually come from that. Now, the interesting thing on that is that you'll know, because I think you may, I'm not sure if you covered that year, but there has been a real sense within Labour members of support for Palestine and a real identification with the struggles of the Palestinian people. So that
what's even more, what was even more remarkable when Jeremy Corbyn became leader and the anti-Semitism smear campaign started. What was really remarkable, and I have to emphasize this, and I always emphasize this when the issue comes about, is that most of the people who have been accused of anti-Semitism are Jewish people who simply challenge the ideology of Zionism and legitimately criticize Israel.
Yeah.
Just on their human rights abuses, And you are the perfect example of that.
Bernie Sanders. I mean, what's amazing about this trick that they do is that they do it every time, and every time it works. But it doesn't just work because it's a trick. It works because the media want it to work, because the establishment want it to work. But what you've also got, what I was going to say was that you had that wonderful vision of the members in the hall during conference waving Palestinian flags. Now, I'm also thinking that recently I've read 2 articles from the new leadership, which basically said we're not going to put up with factionalism anymore. In other words, our factionalism, that's Labour, you're factionalists. And that we're going to come down hard on it. Now, I would be extremely surprised if you would be allowed into a Labour Party conference now with a Palestinian flag. I suspect they will make sure, including by searching bags, that there is no longer any sign like that of support for Palestinians.
Well, I imagine they'll probably. Using their goons in GCHQ and the UK deep state and their comrades in the Israeli deep states. They'll probably also be scavenging anyone's social media post. And heaven forbid somebody said the wrong thing when it comes to criticizing Israel. But anyways, they are going to look into the skeletons in people's closet and say, no, you can't be a member of the Labour Party.
Fortunately, this report, what this leaked report has done, is delayed when the purge will be. But there will be a purge of the left, without doubt. They would much prefer to have half the members they have now than the 500,000 members they have, most of whom are overwhelmingly on the left. They'd much prefer, but they don't care. I mean, look at the Tory party. The Tory party wins without having to have door knockers. In South Thanet, the local party, the local Labour Party was out every day canvassing everywhere. We never ever saw Tory canvassers. They don't have them partly because the membership is so old. They're tucked up in bed, somewhere, or in old people's homes or whatever. But that doesn't matter. They don't need activists to win. They really don't. And so I think what you're going to see is that kind of calculation being made. But of course, that's not going to work for Labour, because Labour will not have the newspapers and the media behind them.
I completely underestimated the power of the propaganda machine in the UK, and I thought the fact that the media in Britain, which in many ways is almost as unwatchable, if not more unwatchable, than the American media. But I did underestimate the power of the media, whether it's the BBC, The Guardian, Channel 4, LBC, Talk Radio, the Murdochs.
It was shocking. I have never known it so rabid. It was absolutely shocking.
But that being said, it seems no matter what comes out with this latest scandal of the Labour Party, and that even if we can get millions at at anti-war rally or to a party conference like the millions of events I covered that you spoke at, that Ken Livingston spoke at with Miko Peled, Ilan Pape, Ken Loach and so forth. But it seems to me as even if we can get, millions, to rallies and educate people through social media and through and exchanging through alternative news, whether it's the Canary or, Morning Star, Press TV and so forth, it seems as if it doesn't matter that because it's just a drop in the bucket compared to the power of the media, in which I'm still quite shocked at how people still do believe the secular churches of England, which is the BBC, Channel 4, The Guardian, and Murdoch and the Daily Mails of the world.
Well, the one that I think shocked most people actually was The Guardian. I mean, they're the obvious bias. I mean, even the kind of the left cover for The Guardian, Owen Jones, with his
ghastly individual,
with his taking away his support, if you remember, from Corbyn at the first coup. I mean, there's lots and lots of research that has been done on this, of the effect that has happened since Jonathan Friedland became the editor, and their voice has been they've been rabid, absolutely rabid, and yet people are still reading it. I don't know how. I mean, the readership has gone down hugely. I have to say.
Because so many people have been disgusted by their anti-Corbyn lynch mob.
Yeah, I don't know how much by, but they've had a huge drop in readership. I'm just amazed that anybody on the left would give them a penny, really.
That's also striking because The Guardian historically has always been a supporter of the Liberal Party, back when the Liberal Party was the controlled opposition, rival oligarchic party, and even when Clement Attlee was the socialist leader of the Labour Party, The Guardian supported the Liberal Party then and was against the NHS. Throughout the 60s and 70s, they were always a supporter of the Liberal Party, even though the Liberal Party was in the complete dustbin of history. Of course, they hated Michael Foot. Yeah. They only supported the Labour Party when the Labour Party did become economically a liberal party and a neoliberal party, and under Tony Blair.
They'll support Starmer because Starmer is a moderate, i.e. on the right, and he's a Zionist. So he fulfills the two things that they need to support him. But, I don't see, for me, Starmer and the Labour Party and those who have control of the Labour Party at the moment are not people on the left. It's not relevant to the politics that I espouse in that way. I don't see it as an opposition. I kind of see it as a wing of the establishment, really.
Do you think, in terms of the people who are going to give up, trying to make trying to keep Corbynism as a force in the Labour Party, and who will join other alternative left parties, do you see many? Do you see this Trotskyist party called the Socialist Equality Party filling that void, or George Galloway's Working Class Party filling that void?
Who knows? I mean, personally, I just there's all sorts of people wanting all sorts of parties to pop up. I don't think we're at that point. We are not at that point in politics. I'm certainly not going to put my energies into those. Yeah, I just think, and neither do I want to speak against them, because you never know. I might be totally wrong, in which case I really, this is one thing I would love to be wrong on. Me and thousands and hundreds and thousands and more people would love to be wrong and find a properly left party that would actually be able to support, to develop in our electoral system. But I just can't see it happening at this point.
And then, where does and then in terms of the Palestine justice movement, are we now? I in my darkest moments, I think we're probably going to see the end of Palestine. the Likud party is not even interested in a two-state solution. I mean, it's bad enough that they don't want to give the Golan Heights back to Syria, but they're not interested in removing any illegal settlements in the West Bank, and they're never going to give up East Jerusalem. And they want, and I think they would like, Jonathan Swift's modest proposal to be implemented in Gaza, which is that they just all, die.
I think that's what they want.
So where does the Palestine justice movement go from here? Because what was a bit hopeful and inspiring was, even though Jewish anti-Zionist voices like you, Tony Greenstein, and others were kicked out of the Labour Party, what was inspiring though was the fact that holy shit, there's a whole community of Jewish people raising their voices for Palestine, and basically, declaring a civil war on the ultra-Zionist leadership that claims to speak on behalf of all Jews.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting thing, and I don't think at this point we can know what's going to happen. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the States, there is no doubt that Jewish opinion there is moving away from Zionism. There's no doubt. If you look at what's happening with young Jews, Zionism, in terms of the Jewish community, is in difficulties. Now, what we know, of course, is that most Zionists are not actually Jewish.
Exactly. It's these, dare I say, it's these Christian fascist organizations, the Christian Coalition, and the Christian right. I mean, Zionism is espoused not even just by the Christian right. I mean, if you look at the Labour Party, Zionism is espoused, and the Tory Party, by the establishment, and it's espoused by the establishment for very, very obvious reasons. But at some point, that shift, which has happened in America within the young Jewish population and with young people, and in the UK, the level of awareness raising that this has sparked off is extraordinary, because people want to know why do we now have to separate anti-Semitism from all other forms of racism? Why is it anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist? Why isn't it racist to tell Palestinians that they have no right to a homeland? These are all. And why is it even wrong to say that Israel was founded on racist ideas, just like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the U.S. were all founded on settler colonialism?
So people are asking these questions. Now, at some point, you hope the chickens will come home to roost, as Malcolm would have said about this. But when that's going to happen, or in what way, or what's going to happen with the Palestinian people, who knows? I mean, just looking at Trump now, who I still expect, by the way, to be re-elected.
Oh, he's going to win a landslide. I predict he's going to win a landslide. And even if he doesn't have a super majority, it'll be a comfortable enough majority.
Whatever. When the choice is between him and Biden, I mean, it's a race to the dementia clinic. To me, that what you have set up now in these
two cemented rival oligarchs. It out.
What's happening now is that you have these puppet figures being put up in terms of the free world, who are obviously not capable of dealing with the complexity of issues that they're supposed to be dealing with. But we all know, come on, it's not Trump who's there organizing, ruling, decreeing this or that. When he came out yesterday and said, "Oh, come on, guys, with the disinfectant," I was only joshing you. You actually know that somebody pulled him away and he said that wasn't such a, maybe you should just, hey, maybe it was, why don't you just say it was just a joke? Oh, yeah, man, I would have said it was just a joke. I'm going to say it's just, these are not the people who are in power. They're just figureheads. And somebody raised, I was having a discussion with somebody, and they were saying, you know, we often used to wonder how people like Caligula or Nero were kept in power in the Roman Empire. And now we see it happening. We actually see how it works. And what we know is that when so-called democracy gets like this, you're actually talking about the end of the empire. And I actually think what we're seeing now that we have such decadence and such corruption, such obvious corruption, I think we're seeing the cracks finally beginning to really show in the system.
Although I would challenge that. Although I think we probably are seeing the empire at its death throes. They're going to kill a lot of people before
Oh yeah.
Before the end. But with climate change, it seems to me as if, unfortunately, the moment they go down, they're taking us all down with them.
I'm not
because you cannot be an environmentalist, let alone an eco-socialist, and support any form of militarism, whether it's NATO, the Five Eyes Alliance, or even one drop of a bomb on Syria.
I'm not saying that won't happen, but I am saying to people, look at these people who are now our leaders. And, there were times that I can remember thinking, well, I don't politically agree with this person, I don't politically agree with that person, and I'm including the UK in this. But you really couldn't look at your leaders and hand on heart say they were ignorant, lying, racist, overt racist, corrupt, and this is what we've got. And we've got a system that is, and people know it, we've got a system which is working to keep those people in power. Now, at that point, what people do, well, some just withdraw from the political system until things get too bad. What brings people back into political activity, those who withdraw, is when they're hungry, or when the storms are too bad and the government's not doing anything for them, or when the health service is really affecting them more. Whatever it is, it's the crises that bring people back on the street. Whether or not it will go that way, or whether the establishment, in an attempt to save themselves, will look at this and say, look, we can't just keep on putting up these knuckleheads, because this is going to go from... And that includes the Democrat Party. I mean, Biden, for God's sake.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a vote. Because I'm an American citizen, I have a vote. And honest to God, if even I am thinking, can I actually vote for Biden? But then
all due respect to Professor Chomsky, to Paul Jay, formerly of the Real News, I can understand people who voted for Hillary Clinton, even though I thought she was a ghastly individual and just a terrible politician. But I can understand people's appeal towards her, people's appeal towards Obama. I even understand people's appeal for Michael Bloomberg and Pete Buttigieg. I mean, I'm not a centrist and I'm not center-right, but I can understand why people like them. And I can even come up with three policies of theirs that's, But Joe Biden, I'm sorry, I cannot... people who say you need to vote for Joe Biden, I'm sorry, you've lost. You've lost the moral high ground and your finger wagging and your ability to judge Trump supporters.
What we should be looking at is who the vice president is, because I'm not sure he'll make it through 4 terms, because he does. I mean, he looks properly old. I mean.
And to think Bernie Sanders got the ageist treatment when I can tell you Bernie has way more energy and is alert
Yeah.
He's there. He's of sound mind. Both he and Trump, for that matter, compared to Joe Biden, were I swear to God, I like Boris Johnson makes more sense than him.
This is what I mean. When a system has got so decadent that as its figureheads, it's putting up people who are obviously of low caliber, presumably because, I don't know, because the clever people really don't want to do that, because that's not where the power lies, or because whatever reason it is, then we're in trouble. And this virus is not even, it's not like we've got an Ebola style virus. It's not. You know, if this had been an Ebola style virus, think of the number of deaths now in America. Think of the chaos that's happening in the States with this virus as compared to Europe. And I'm not saying Europe is doing fantastically well, but I think.
Well, the U.S. the U.S. is always going to be more volatile because it's the place where anyone can get a gun and express their revolts.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems to me that you know what's happening in terms of the virus in America is asking for a real upturn in that spike. So, you know.
Well, let's shift away a bit. I think we've covered the election autopsy, all we need to do, and where does the left go, and where does the left go from there. And let's go back into history a bit because before this interview, I was looking at more and more documentaries on the Black civil rights movement, the Black experience in Britain, and I want you to talk about. Can you talk about the fact that in Britain there was a Black Panther Party, but not all of the members were even Black Britons? And can you talk about that and the famous Brixton riots that happened? I think in the early '80s. I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing is that it, very much you can tell which side you're on if you call it riots or uprising. I still live. Very near to where the uprising was. And I was living, and what happened at Brixton didn't just happen in Brixton.
Yeah.
The centre was in Brixton, but actually it was around the whole of southeast London, which is where a lot of people, and bits of north, which is where people of African descent live. And, I suppose the hub, the spark, was in Brixton. And certainly at the time I was teaching in a mostly Black boys secondary school. So teaching...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so teaching people from 11 to 18. And a number of the young people that I was teaching were actually involved on the streets at that time. And the problem is, isn't it, you're very torn, aren't you, with these things? Because there was a Tory government at that time, and...
Thatcher, right?
Thatcher. And a guy called Heseltine was given the job of looking at what happened during the uprising or riots, whichever one you want to call it, and actually came out with a whole load of reforms, which to some extent did improve conditions, physical, material conditions for many. But that actually also then led to the sort of the ethnic cleansing of Brixton. So Brixton has now become one of the most expensive areas to live in London.
So they gentrified it.
Totally, yeah. It's very, I mean, I couldn't afford to live in Brixton now. My brother, who is...
But now the historical context, sorry to interrupt, but now the historical context, like what led to the uprising was basically, those of the Windrush generation who had been subjected to racist abuse upon racist abuse and a lack of social mobility, had basically had enough of the xenophobia, had enough of the white supremacist terror that they are living under, and revolted.
I'd say something a bit more complicated than that, because those weren't the people on the streets. People on the streets tended to be, and there was a lot of white people on the streets actually as well. It wasn't just a lot of black people. If you were in Brixton, you would have also seen a number of white people on the streets there. It was very much people from, say, 16 to 25 or 30 who were there. So these weren't people who had come in the Windrush. A lot of them were like the kids I was teaching. Their parents who had come in on the Windrush had then brought them over from the Caribbean to here. So they had experienced real severe dislocation, initially from their parents who left to come and work in this country, and then coming into this country themselves to find themselves in very poor schooling, very poor housing, with very high rates of unemployment, and then on top of that, really draconian policing, what was called stop and search, which meant that as in particular, black man, the likelihood of you being, you didn't need, the police didn't need a reason to stop and search you. They could just decide to stop and search you.
And that's still happening today in Britain and in the US and elsewhere.
It is, but not to the extent it was happening then. I mean, this was a real campaign of trying to control the movement, in particular, of black men. And as well, you know, police were planting drugs on young black men, and the imprisonment rates were going extremely high. And that was actually the spark which caused the uprising, is that people, you know, here they are, they've got bad housing, they're unemployed, and then they go on the streets, they're harassed on the streets, and there you have it, the spark. And you know, what the individual spark was, which was around this dealing which was happening with the car, is almost irrelevant, because it then flowered everywhere, because this real sense of outrage. And now the sad thing about this is that I don't, you know, the Caribbean population, I think we're yet again having a really hard time in terms of racism in this country. I have never known it so bad. When you can have a lack of parliamentary representation, when you can have the black MPs that we have being racially abused within their own party, and by the way, this was then not really very much reported in the media. It was hardly, I mean, remember how when the
media spent a great deal of time, you know, abusing them, particularly Diane Abbott, who's not even that much of a flaming left-winger to begin with, but
yeah. So you have a great deal of anger, pent-up anger, again, within the black community. And one of the problems is, for me, and it's not, I'm certainly not, you know, I'm not saying I advocate this, but it strikes me that as long as black people are quiet, nothing happens. Because we don't have power. We have no friends in powerful places. We have no friends with money behind us. We don't have positions of power within the media. So we can't, there is no pressure to organize in the way that other groups might organize pressure. We don't have that.
Is that because Britain, which is such a which is I mean the US, their original sin is class, but the US, really, the original sin has always been white supremacy, whether it's towards indigenous people, the stealing of the lands of Mexicans, and of course the enslavement of black Black Africans. Now, Britain, which I personally think that Britain is still an empire, just in a different form. But the fact that Britain's original sin has always been the class issue. And do you think the fact that the British left because it's so class conscious that that the Black Caribbeans, the South Asians, whether they're from Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, and so forth, the fact that they see themselves as as working class first, working poor first, and struggling middle class first, and their ethnicity second, it's why there hasn't been the same level of pride of color and militancy as in the U.S.
I think it's much more simple than that. I think you're talking about a community whose roots are so much more shallow than they are in the US. And it's not a group of people that's come through slavery in this country. The history of slavery is not substantially in this country. Of course, there was a history of slavery, but not in the direct plantation system we didn't have running here. And so the black people here, for example, black people in the States, fought in the Civil War, had all that disappointment, the grinding disappointment of having the expectations raised of what you would buy into by fighting on the right side of the, we didn't go through that. Most people who are here, people of colour, have only been here since the 50s. Now, I could tell you as well that, of course, black people have been here since Roman times, and that certainly in the 18th century, about 20% of the population of London was black. But of course, that became assimilated within the population as a whole. Mm-hmm. But I'm talking about the recent recognisable people of colour. There's another issue here that separates us from the US, which is, when I say integrated, something like 60% of Caribbean people marry white partners.
Yeah.
It's really high. You'll know that from coming here.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so normal to see biracial romance depicted on television. So yeah,
it's standard. And I think I read somewhere that means that within 60, 70 years, you won't actually have an identifiable Caribbean population here. But you might get people with a bit of a darker skin and a bit more curly hair. So you don't have, in the US, there isn't that level of integration. So it's very hard. It's much more difficult. Neither do we have a tranche of black millionaires, black academics, those people in that superstar level who fund this or can be the figureheads of that. We don't have that. And the ones we have are people like Trevor Phillips, who, basically get where they are by doing the job of the white establishment much better than they do it. So we don't have that kind of, we didn't have a Malcolm.
So there is no British equivalent to Dr. Cornel West or to Michelle Alexander, or and certainly no kind of a British black equivalent to the outlets I was covering, the Labour Party conference, Black Agenda Reports.
No, we had Stuart Hall, of course, and we had. Rest in peace, Stuart. Paul Gilroy, who's gone very quiet ever since he returned from America. But they didn't take on the same kind of stature. And also, if you look just statistically, I can't remember what the precise figures are in academia, but people of colour there's hardly any black professors.
Compared to someone from like India or Pakistan or...
So you're talking about a very much younger population where there is barely a middle class yet. You have, in America, a black middle class. Now, you may not like them, or you may think they should be doing this or that or the other. But you have a whole tranche of black. I'm talking about people of African descent when I'm saying black. That's not, by the way, saying that Asians aren't black, but I'm just for this. You have that. We do not. We do not yet have that. And it makes a huge difference.
Edris, we talked a little bit about this, but I know Edris Elba, he said that he had to go to the U.S. just to get a job as an actor. And you see it's funny because you see many black British actors playing American roles, playing and living the black American experience, and I think it's going to get to a head because Samuel L. Jackson complained that he basically was complaining that black British actors are stealing.
Look, I mean, I've talked to a number of black actors. Without a doubt, you cannot make. I mean, that's the level of racism that you have, and it's not the racism that wants to lynch you up. Mostly, it's a kind of racism where you just don't get jobs, where you just don't get selected to be an MP, where you just don't get to go on to the disciplinary structures to decide, where actually, you just don't get positions. And that's why people go to America who are actors. So we're not there yet. We're far, far, far away from being there yet. I suspect it's going to take a minimum of another 30 years.
How about the music scene though? Because the black British music scene is still quite vibrant.
Yeah.
I mean it's fairly undergroundish, but now grime seems to be getting more and more popular, and of course reggae is quite popular, and the different kind of new what they call raga and dance hall and so forth, and all these wonderful black British female singers are also quite big in Britain.
Music is a different scene anyway. Like music and sports are a different scene. They're quite happy to have their darkies singing to you and being really good at sports. I mean, that tradition goes back to the plantation. So I don't hold too much by that.
And of course they themselves.
Scathing of me, wasn't it?
Well, there does need to be some home truths, because even though there's a great plenty of black British singers and black British rappers who do drill and grime music and so forth, and yes, they get invited onto Glastonbury. Jules Holland does a very good job of giving them, but they themselves don't go out of their way to really explicitly talking about the black experience. That's why I was asking you if they see themselves as their social class, their socioeconomic class first, and their racial identity second.
Yeah, I think their racial identity second, mostly. Not all. Of course, there are a number of exceptions, as there are exceptions with, I think writers tend to be different again. I think it's a very different thing that happens with black writers and with black playwrights as well. But, I just think we are 2 generations away. 2 generations away.
From a militant identity being affirmed and a kind of a new renaissance that's about to come, that hopefully does come about.
Yeah, definitely.
And then but then talk to us a bit about Diane Abbott, who's one of the most talk to us about the dynamics of a Diane Abbott, who's one of the most well-known Labour MPs, and then somebody like Fucker Umuna. I mean, I'm sorry, Chaka Umuna.
Yeah, I mean, terribly.
And by the way, people on social media, do not harass Jackie for my F-bombs and my insults to Chaka Umuna. You can email me, yurismouter@hotmail.com for that.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of names that have been gathered up by Chaka, aren't there? And yes, I don't think I'll bother to repeat most of them, but they do have something to do with him being black on the outside and white on the inside. But I think he's he's a person of little consequence.
Just your typical opportunist.
Yeah, I just got nothing to say about him except that he used to wear the most beautiful suits. So wherever he chose his suits from, you know, he was the man for that. But apart from that, I barely think of him as being a black person. I've never heard him speak about being a black person. Literally, I have never.
So it sounds to me he missed his opportunity. He could have been the black. He could have been the black. No, he could have been not the black Obama. He could have been the British Obama.
Yeah, the British Obama. Yeah, but he's never identified. That was the thing. He's never. I literally have never heard him saying, as a black person, or I think black people. I've never ever heard it. I'm honestly not sure about whether it was ever suggested to him that he could have made political capital in that way. I'm sure if somebody had suggested it and he had thought it over, he would have adopted it. But, you know, he didn't. Anyway, I just don't think about him as being a black MP or a black political figure in any way.
Did he and Sam Giammatteo, who was this black, socially conservative and fiscally conservative Tory MP, who because of disagreements over Brexit, he was allowed to be in the Liberal Democrats, both he and Chaka. But did they both lose their?
Yeah, they did. They all lost.
I can tell you, even though it was sad that Corbyn lost, there were so many people who I was so happy lost.
The laughter, Chaka. Well, no.
Joe Swinson lost, and there was.
I would be so surprised if we didn't see a resurrection of some of the worst MPs under Starmer. So I think we'll see Chaka Amuna being helicoptered back into a constituency. You know, that, yeah, eek. So remember me when that happens. Diane, of course.
And Diane is yeah. Go on. Tell us about Diane Abbott, because she's quite a fascinating person.
Black woman MP. She came in when that tranche of black MPs came in 87, I think. And they, you know, Bernie Grant, Boateng, you know, all of those people came in, and they really came in on what people thought was going to be the start of this kind of black surge. It was when black sections were actually working within Labour. But of course, all that was destroyed by Tony Blair. We don't have black representation in Labour anymore. We have what's called BAME Labour. And basically, BAME Labour is a deeply corrupt organisation.
So that's Black, Asian, and Middle Eastern? Or?
Yeah, Black and minority ethnic. So you can be white, for example, and be in Labour BAME.
Because if you're from from a poor Eastern European background, you're.
No, you can be Irish. You can be Jewish. You know. Anyway.
Okay.
So that was when black sections really, you know, got underway. And whatever one thinks about Diane's politics, she's always been good on immigration. She's always been good on immigration and about war. And she has lost positions. If you remember, she lost her position in the shadow cabinet the last time because of, I think it was her position on Syria, if you recall. Yeah, so she's always.
Actually, explain that. Explain that. I did not hear that.
I can't quite remember now what it was, but when she was last in the shadow cabinet, she did not toe the shadow cabinet line. And she has never toed the shadow. You know, she's always, in matters of war, Iraq war, Syria, any of those, she's always voted consistently against. Same thing with immigration. She's always been consistently on the right side. But what she has done better than anybody else is managed to take a barrage of abuse and threats. Now, let's be clear that, there's been huge amount of time spent on the anti-Semitic abuse that's been received by a number of Jewish women MPs.
And it was fake.
Well,
there was no anti-Semitism crisis.
They did actually receive some anti-Semitic abuse, but Diane Abbott has had more racist abuse than all of the MPs put together. So not just the Jewish ones, but she's had more abuse than any other MP. And it's been vitriolic against her in the press, and she stood up and is that because she explicitly decided to go for Jeremy Corbyn as the leader, or no. I mean, this started before. I mean, she's always identified with being on the left, and there's nothing that the British media and establishment, as I know, hate more than a left-wing black woman. I mean, they find it much easier if you're a black man or a white man, but to be a black woman and on the left, you're asking for it, according to them.
In which you're a perfect example of that, and the fact that you do identify. Well, you don't identify. You are Jewish. That is part of your identity, essential part of your identity.
Yes, and black. Yes, and I won't be told by anybody what my identity is. I mean, none of your business anyway. But it's
that gets into sort of a sexist thing, because it seems to me if you're a very outspoken and wonderfully articulate woman and you boldly tell the truth, the backlash you get is even more vicious than what a Noam Chomsky and Max Blumenthal gets.
Oh yeah, much more. It's much more. Oh yeah, and the threats and what the threats say. I don't know very many men who told that they're going to be multiply raped and then have petrol poured on them and burnt, and that's what you get. That's what you get. One of the things that happened to me when I went for my hearing with the Labour Party is on the back page of one of their pieces of evidence was this racist cartoon about me. And I asked for them to withdraw that piece of it was a piece of evidence. There were 250 pages of evidence against me. I asked them to withdraw that evidence because as I spoke, I would have to look at the racist cartoon against me, and they refused.
Now, why was that used as an evidence against you? Because you were being accused of anti-Semitism, but here's this racist thing. It sounds to me as if it should have been the other way around. You should have been the one to complain to whoever was a supposedly member of the Labour Party for that racist stuff.
Not the Labour Party, that question. Not me. I don't know. But I do know that when they were asked, I think they hadn't noticed it. I think that is, and now that you see the level of racism within that department, you can see how they would have looked at that and they wouldn't have thought that would matter. That's what you're talking about. That's how racism works. But even when I asked for that one piece of paper to be withdrawn, they refused because it didn't matter to them.
And I know for a fact that you did feel you did feel personally betrayed. You were thrown under the bus by people by people you had known for years who were your comrades, like John Landsman, another Jewish person who all of a sudden, along with the Jewish misleadership class, excommunicated the likes of you, Glenn Secker, and Tony Greenstein, and others. But did you feel personally very hurt with the fact that somebody like Diane Abbott, who has stepped into your shoes, three times over didn't defend you, and in fact did say that there was an anti-Semitism crisis. We're dealing with it.
Oh, of course, he felt disappointed. I mean, I understand it. You know, it's very hard. Look what happened with Chris Williamson. You know, you get hung out to dry, you get lynched, you get a political lynching. So I can understand it. But I think the person who upset me the most was not Diane Abbott. I mean, she was fighting her own corner under huge pressure. But people like John McDonnell, I'll never forgive. I'll never forgive John McDonnell for going out on a limb to back Margaret Hodge, for going out on a limb to back Alistair Campbell.
And John McDonnell, who said that Tony Blair wasn't a war criminal, and then was invited on the Andrew Marr show, and then Andrew Marr, that monkey windbag, was saying to John McDonnell, you know what you could do to get some credibility is you cannot go on RT, the Russian propaganda outlet. And then John McDonnell threw RT under the bus, even though every time he's on the one RT program I like to watch called Going Underground, Afshin Ratanzi goes out of his way to be objective, let everybody have their say. I mean, Afshin is way more impartial and considers all voices than any of those windbags from the Guardian, Channel 4, Sky TV, and so forth.
That's what I couldn't bear. I couldn't bear that. I'm actually going to have to stop in 5 minutes.
No problem.
Yeah, I've got another Zoom that's going to come in at 2.
No problem. You've been very generous with your time, Jackie. And in closing, one last thing I'll say about McDonald is that the fact that McDonald is the one that's feigning outrage over all of these revelations when he himself was on the front line of making sure that people got easily kicked out more and bragged about it.
Worse than that, when he was being told that there were problems, when he was being told that there was outrages happening. And I don't mind, I'm quite happy for him to say, well, look, politically, it was hard to do this. But then stay silent on all of it. But he didn't do that. He backed Margaret Hodge. He backed her. He backed the world.
Someone who is the polar opposite, has nothing in common with all the things he and Jeremy Corbyn have campaigned for their entire life.
So if you're going to
right-winger.
You're going to stay silent. But don't go out of your way to support our opponents. That puts you on another side.
All right. Well, Jackie, you mentioned that you have to leave, so I just want to say thank you for 2 times for being very generous with your time. This is going to be the start of many conversations, because I am going to be covering a lot of British politics, and you have so much knowledge, and I learned so much from learning from you. So I want this to be the first of many conversations, and I want us also to talk a lot about the plight of Black British people and where they go from there. And until then, I wish you and your comrades the best of luck in Britain as everyone tries to figure out where does the People Power movement go from here, where does the anti-war movement and the Palestine justice movement go from here. And I hope that this civil war that is happening within the Jewish community, I only hope that the Jewish anti-Zionist voices win, because it'll be better for all of the People Power movements and getting Israel also into into the right direction.
Great.
Until then, power to the people.
What else?
And I look forward to future conversations. So take care of yourselves, Jackie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.